Catlin, and we're going to be looking at a skill lesson with the lens of the whole group rotation on. So I'm going to stay in grade 7 since that's the grade that I used for the last example. We're in the instructional path, and I am going to choose a skill. I'm going to choose the skill lesson for informational text structure. Again, when I sit down and work with teachers and we're trying to look at a StudySync lesson and think about which blended learning model do we want to use for this particular lesson, we will often start with just the preview, make sure we kind of get a sense for what are students being asked to do in this lesson, what are the parts of the lesson, how will they appear to the students as they're navigating the lesson, and then we figure out what blended learning model will work best. And oftentimes for skill lessons, a whole group rotation where the entire class moves between offline and online activities and tasks is a really nice fit for the skill lesson. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual lesson plan itself. Again, we review the objectives and kind of look at the overview of the lesson before we start pulling it apart to think about which pieces make sense offline and which pieces make sense online and which pieces really need to be done individually versus which would be really helpful to be done as an entire class or even in small collaborative groups offline. So the first part of this is to watch the concept video where the students are introducing text structure. And so I would pull this. I think that watching the video together as a whole group can be a really powerful way to start a skill lesson. That way everybody's really tuned into the information. And you can see in the lesson plan, there are 3 moments where it's suggested that you pause the video and just kind of talk with kids, make sure they understand kind of what's happening in the video. And so I'm going to go ahead and start online or offline together, and we are going to watch this video as a group. So that as a teacher, I can project it in the front of the room. I can ask students, have devices closed, just watch the video. And then 24 seconds into the video, I'll pause it and I'll ask, what can analyzing text structure help you to understand? And give kids a chance to either raise their hand and contribute to a whole group discussion, or I'm kind of a big fan of, turn to your neighbor and answer this question. That way everybody can have their voice heard as opposed to just a select few in the context of the whole class discussion. Then we have this kind of read and discuss where after they've seen the concept definition, then they have kind of a discussion possibility, right? Where they can read the little section underneath the video and have a conversation about what they've seen. So I'm going to go ahead and do this read and discuss also as an offline pair activity. So after they've seen the video, I'm going to ask them to turn to their neighbor and I'm going to have them tackle these questions right here. And so this will be a short little kind of follow-up conversation. Then if we go back to the lesson plan, now we have the model. And the model is great, though the model there's a lot of text in the model. So oftentimes in a skill lesson, the model is the moment where I really want them taking in this valuable information where the concepts from the first video they saw are really fleshed out. Not only do they talk about the different individual text structures, they go over sequential, problem solution, cause and effect, comparison and contrast, but they also talk about why would somebody use a particular text structure? Like what is the impact of that text structure? And then they give examples. So one of the things that I will often encourage teachers to do is 1, look at the Access handout so that your kids who are going to need extra scaffolds and supports get those as they're navigating the skill lesson. But also, for me personally, I like to do a lot with guided notes when I'm working with students. So as they're going through the model, I am asking students to identify in the first column the type of text structure, so actually write the names of them. Then in the second column, define or describe this text structure, like what does it look like? Third column, why would an author use this text structure? And then in the last one, give me an example of a text that uses this particular structure. And they can pull those examples directly from the model, or I invite them, if you have read an informational text that you believe follows a sequential or cause and effect text structure, feel free to use that in your notes. And so what I would say is I pull from the read and annotate the model section. I would put this as an online individual, since every student is going to kind of read at their own pace. And then I would say complete the guided notes, and I would have, the link to the guided notes, so it's easy for me to share with them these notes. So if I'm using Google Classroom, I can blast out the guided notes via Google Classroom. If I want this to be a totally like offline note taking, I can make copies of the notes and give it to students. Then once they have taken notes, I will have them go directly into the Your Turn on their own. And so this is just a nice way to get them practicing. So I like to, some students are going to take a lot longer on the model. And so I'm going to keep this online, individual, and have them do the Your Turn. Now I am very aware that usually the Your Turn, gives me great data as the teacher, but it's probably not going to be enough for kids to really kind of hone the skill of identifying the kinds of text structure that the different informational texts are actually using. And so I will follow this with an offline collaborative. And in the offline collaborative, I would put them in small groups, give them several text examples and then ask them to work collaboratively to label each text structure and explain why they believe that is the correct label. So, label. Oh my goodness. And so that gives them an opportunity to, we have the offline together, watching the video, having a conversation about the content. You have this offline pair discussion activity where they're following the video by talking about it. You have the online individual where they're reading and annotating the model and maybe taking some guided notes. Then you have the online individual where they go into the Your Turn, so you can see individually how much is sticking, what are they understanding. And then you send them offline collaborative where they can really work together to kind of take what they just learned and apply it to a handful of other texts. So, making photocopies of 5 different informational texts and then allowing students to say, oh, I think this one is sequential and this is why. I really am a big fan of them kind of like justifying their answers. And so that's a nice way to follow up and give them more practice. So just an example of how to take a skill lesson and make it a whole group rotation where there's some offline components, there's some online components, there's some individual components, there's some collaborative components, and there's even opportunities, if you wanted to follow the model with another discussion between these two pieces where, again, you go offline and it's a pair conversation or a small group conversation. There was a whole nother set of discussion questions that I could have used for that. But again, I'm not going to get through everything, and a teacher's not going to get through everything in a lesson. So it's really about figuring out how much time do they have, what are the biggest priorities in that lesson, and how can we craft a dynamic whole group rotation around the parts of the skill lesson that the teacher thinks are most valuable at that moment in the school year and for that particular group of students. So Your job is to choose a skill lesson. I will share a whole group template with you, but you saw me adjusting and modifying it, so feel free to add columns, delete columns, change headers, make it work for you. And all of the whole group lessons that are submitted, I will give comments, feedback, ask questions, share resources, so that hopefully you guys, when you're working with the teacher, you have a really strong exemplar that you can share.